You know that feeling when a simple conversation starts off completely fine, and then somehow within minutes, you're in a full-blown argument that neither of you even wanted? You're not even sure how you got there. One second you're talking about something small, something ordinary, and the next second there's this wall between you and the other person, and both of you are saying things you don't actually mean. That feeling, that confusion, that exhaustion, that's what we're diving into today, because that doesn't happen by accident. There's a pattern behind it, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's start with something real. Think about the last time an argument escalated on you. Maybe it started with a tone, maybe it started with a single word that landed the wrong way. And before you could even process what was happening, the conversation had shifted from the actual topic to something much deeper, much more emotional. Suddenly it wasn't about the dishes or the plans for the weekend or the thing that was said at dinner. Suddenly it was about feeling unheard, feeling disrespected, feeling like you don't matter. That shift, that rapid, almost invisible shift is the pattern. And most people never even realize it's happening because they're too deep inside it. Here's what the research consistently shows. The majority of arguments that escalate to the point of real damage don't start as big arguments. They start as micro-moments. A slight dismissal, a brief interruption, a tone that carries just a little bit of edge. These tiny moments stack on top of each other like pressure building inside a sealed container. And the explosion that happens, the thing that people later describe as the argument, that's not the real problem. That's just the release. The real damage was already being done long before either person raised their voice. Now stop for a second because I need you to really sit with this. Think about how much energy you've spent in your life trying to resolve arguments after they've already escalated. The apologies, the sleepless nights, the replaying of conversations in your head, the wondering what you could have said differently. That is an enormous cost. Not just emotionally, but in time, in mental space, in the quality of your relationships. People who understand this pattern and learn how to interrupt it don't just have fewer arguments. They have fundamentally different relationships. The difference is staggering. And here's where I want to offer you something before we go deeper, because what I'm about to share with you is valuable, but it is honestly just the surface. If you're the kind of person who takes their relationships seriously, who is tired of watching good connections slowly erode because of patterns neither person fully understands, there is a program linked in the video description below. It goes far beyond what we can cover here today. But I will tell you this. Most people who find it at a point where they've already waited too long. Don't be that person. Now back to the pattern. The escalating tension pattern in arguments follows a very specific sequence. And once you understand the sequence, you start to see it everywhere. It starts with a trigger. The trigger is almost always something small, a comment, a look, a pause that lasted a beat too long. The trigger by itself is not the problem. The problem is what happens next, which is interpretation. When the trigger lands, the other person doesn't respond to what actually happened. They respond to what they believe it meant. And those two things, what happened and what it meant, are almost never the same. If someone has a history of feeling dismissed, then a short one-word response feels like confirmation of that fear. If someone has a history of feeling controlled, then a concerned question feels like an interrogation. The brain doesn't process triggers neutrally. It filters them through every past wound, every old memory, every unresolved conversation that came before. So the person isn't actually responding to you in that moment. They're responding to the story their brain is telling about you based on everything that has ever happened before. This is the part that breaks people's hearts when they finally understand it, because it means that two people in an argument can both be completely convinced that they are responding reasonably to what just happened, and both of them can be completely wrong. Both of them are fighting ghosts. Both of them are in a conversation that is partly about right now and partly about years ago. And neither of them knows it. Here's where it gets even more intense. Once interpretation fires, it triggers a physiological response. The body doesn't distinguish between a perceived social threat and a physical one. The same systems activate. Heart rate increases. Breathing changes. The part of the brain responsible for rational, calm, thoughtful communication starts to go offline. And the part of the brain responsible for survival takes over. You've heard the phrase fight or flight. Well, arguments are where fight or flight shows up in your living room, in your car, in your kitchen. And the tragedy is that the person you care about most becomes in that activated state, the thing your nervous system is treating as a threat. So now you have two people, both triggered, both interpreting, both physiologically activated, both fighting from a place of fear and protection rather than connection. And both of them think the other person started it. Both of them are waiting for the other person to come back to reason first. And so the argument doesn't resolve, it escalates. And with each escalation, more things get said, More wounds get opened, more emotional distance gets created, and over time, over hundreds of these small cycles, a relationship that started with genuine love and genuine connection starts to feel like a war zone. I'm not exaggerating. Relationship experts who have spent decades studying couples in distress will tell you that it is rarely a single catastrophic event that destroys a relationship. It is this pattern, repeated over and over again, that slowly convinces two people that they are incompatible, that they don't understand each other, that they never will. When in reality, they are simply trapped in a cycle they never learned how to break. The cost of staying trapped in this cycle is not abstract. People lose years. They lose entire relationships that had enormous potential. They lose trust with their children who grow up watching these patterns and then carry them into their own relationships. The pattern doesn't just hurt you. It reproduces itself. It passes itself forward. That is the real cost of not understanding this. Not just your own pain, but the pain that gets handed down. Now let me tell you what the other side looks like. Because this is where things shift dramatically. People who understand this pattern, and more importantly who understand how to interrupt it, experience something that most people assume is just luck, or chemistry, or compatibility. They experience conversations that stay connected even when they're hard. They experience conflict that actually moves toward resolution, instead of deeper damage. They experience the feeling of being truly heard by someone even when both of them disagree. That is not luck, that is skill. And skills can be learned. When you know where the trigger is going to go, you can catch it before it becomes interpretation. When you understand that the person in front of you isn't actually attacking you but is instead operating from a wound that has nothing to do with this moment, something in you softens, not because you're being weak, not because you're surrendering, but because you are operating from a completely different level of understanding. And that understanding changes everything about how you show up. People who master this report something remarkable. They say that their relationships didn't just get less argumentative, they got deeper. Because when the cycle of escalation breaks, there is space for real honesty. There is space for vulnerability. There is space for the kind of conversations that actually bring two people closer instead of driving them further apart. And those conversations, the ones that most people never get to have because they're too busy surviving the cycle, those are the conversations that build the kind of connection people spend their whole lives looking for. Think about what your life looks like 6 months from now if you understand this fully. Not just intellectually, but practically. Not just knowing what the pattern is, but knowing exactly what to do when you feel it starting. The number of unnecessary arguments you would avoid. The amount of emotional energy you would reclaim. The way the people closest to you would begin to experience you differently. That transformation doesn't take years. For most people who genuinely apply this, the shift starts happening within days. Within the first conversation where they catch the pattern and choose differently. This is what separates people who talk about wanting better relationships from the ones who actually have them. Not desire, not intention, not even love. Because most people in struggling relationships love each other deeply. What separates them is understanding and the willingness to apply it even when they're in the heat of the moment. And here's something that I want to leave you with that most people never hear. You do not need the other person to change for this to work. That is the most powerful thing about understanding this pattern. When one person in a cycle changes how they respond, the cycle cannot continue in the same way. It literally cannot. The pattern requires both people to play their role. When you stop playing yours, something completely different becomes possible. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of leverage that changes lives. If you've watched this far, you already know something that most people spend years trying to figure out. And if you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to move from understanding this conceptually to being able to apply it in real time even in your most difficult conversations, the program linked in the video description below is the next step. Everything in it is built around practical application, not theory. The people who go through don't just feel better about their relationships, they operate differently inside them. But here's what I'll say honestly, this is not for everyone. If you're not actually ready to do the work, if you're hoping for a shortcut that doesn't require you to look at yourself, this isn't it. But if you're truly done with the cycle, if you are genuinely ready for something different, do not wait. The version of you who keeps waiting is the version of you who stays stuck. The version of you who acts today is the version who gets to experience what's actually possible.